3 standard cycles earlier, the Cerati Empire had been on the brink of collapse. Their home system, Kelry's Prime, was under siege by the Vrax Dominion, a machine logic civilization that believed organic life was an inefficient accident of the universe. The Galactic Concord debated sanctions, resolutions, and strongly worded condemnations while Cerati cities burned. Humanity didn't debate. We didn't have the political weight, the ancient fleets, or the respect. What we had was something the galaxy still hadn't learned to quantify: stubbornness and a deep, almost pathological refusal to let bullies win. Earth sent a volunteer expeditionary force. Officially, we were humanitarian support. Unofficially, we were there to buy time. I was assigned as a logistics coordinator, food routes, medical supplies, evacuation corridors. I wasn't meant to see combat. War doesn't care about job descriptions. When the Vrax breached the outer defense ring, my convoy was caught between a refugee column and the mechanized assault unit. Cerati soldiers were pinned down, civilians screaming, plasma fire turning the sky white. I had one ship, lightly armed, undercrewed, and a choice. I order my pilot to cut engines and dump every power cell into the forward shields. Then I rammed the Vrax formation head-on. The impact tore half our hull apart. I remember alarms, screaming metal, and the sickening lurch as gravity failed. I remember dragging wounded Cerati out of the wreckage with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. And I remember a pair of luminous violet eyes watching me from the smoke. Princess Veilira. She'd been part of a forward diplomatic detachment, trapped planetside when the Vrax struck early. Her guards were dead. Her armor was cracked. She was bleeding a color I didn't have a name for. I carried her 3 kilometers to the evac zone. Humans don't realize how heavy royalty can be. The middle, the weight of gratitude. After the war, after humanity's reckless counteroffensive stalled the Vrax advance long enough for the Concorde to grow a spine, everything changed. The Cerati hailed humans as shield-bearers. Monuments were raised. Songs were written. Earth received trade privileges that made entire economies salivate. I received a medal and a medical discharge. Turns out ramming machine fleets does things to your spine. I would have faded into obscurity if Veilira hadn't sought me out. At first, it was formal. Invitations. Thank you ceremonies. Carefully scripted expressions of gratitude. I attended because refusing a princess is a great way to start an interstellar incident. But somewhere along the way, the formality cracked. She asked me questions no diplomat ever had. Why humans volunteered when they had so little to gain. Why we fought for people who weren't our own. Why, when everything went wrong, I'd smiled at her and said, "It'll be okay. We're stubborn like that." I didn't have good answers. Just honest ones. She started visiting the human embassy without notice. Sitting with our engineers. Watching our medics work. Laughing. Actually laughing when one of our pilots tried to teach her Earth card games. And I noticed things too. The way she carried centuries of expectation in her posture. The loneliness behind the pageantry. The quiet horror when she learned how many human volunteers hadn't come home. One night, standing on a balcony overlooking Kelry's Prime's glowing oceans, she asked me something that changed everything. "Commander Reyes," she said softly, "do humans believe bonds forged in war are sacred?" I stared out at the stars. "We believe they're heavy. You don't walk away from them easily." She nodded, as if confirming something she'd feared and hoped in equal measure. A month later, rumors started. The Cerati High Council whispered about symbolic union. About binding the rising human star to their ancient throne. About stabilizing alliances through something older than treaties. I tried to ignore it, until Veilira asked me herself. The proposal, which brought us back to the Crystal Hall. Hundreds of eyes. Record drones hovering. Translators humming softly. And a princess on one knee. Protocol screamed at me to answer quickly. Accept or decline. Either way, history would remember the moment. But humans are bad at simple answers. I looked at Veilira. Really looked at her. Not the crown. Not the title. The woman who had watched cities burn and still believed in something better. I'm honored, I said slowly, my voice carrying farther than I expected. More than you know. Relief flickered across her face. But I continued, and the hall collectively inhaled. I can't accept, at least not without one condition. Murmurs erupted. Cerity Noble stiffened. Concord delegates leaned forward like predators, scenting blood. Veilira didn't rise. She just tilted her head, eyes searching my face. Speak your condition, Daniel Reyes, she said. Not Commander. Daniel. I swallowed. If I marry you, I said, it won't be as a political asset. Not as a symbol. Not as a human leash tied to a Cerity throne. The hall went deathly quiet. I will not be used to command my people, and I won't let my people be dragged into wars or decisions without their voice. If we do this, it's because we choose each other. As equals. Gasps. Outrage. Shock. A human telling a galactic princess how marriage worked. I wasn't done. And there's more, I said. If I become part of the Cerity royal line, then the Cerity will accept something in return. Veilira rose slowly to her feet. What is it you ask? She said carefully. I met her gaze. You will stand with humanity, the way we stood with you. Not as patrons. Not as overlords. But as allies who bleed when we bleed. The words hung in the air, heavy as gravity. For centuries, I finished, the galaxy has decided what humans are worth without asking us. That ends here. The choice. The Cerity High Council erupted. Some called it an insult. Others a threat. A few, very few, looked thoughtful. Veilira turned away from them and faced me fully. Do you believe, she asked quietly, that your people would accept such a bond? I didn't hesitate. They'll argue about it. Complain. Make terrible memes. A few diplomats blinked at the translation. But if they believe it's real, I said, if they believe it's honest, they'll stand by it. That's what we do. She studied me for a long moment. Then she did something no one expected. She took my hand. I do not wish for a symbol, Veilira said, her voice ringing with sudden steel. I wish for a partner who would dare challenge my throne to keep his soul intact. She turned to the High Council. I accept his condition. Silence. Then uproar. But it didn't matter anymore. The fallout. The weeks that followed nearly broke the Concord. Legal teams argued over precedents. Economists panicked. Military analysts rewrote threat models overnight. A human marrying into an ancient empire wasn't just romance. It was a shift in gravitational balance. On Earth, reactions ranged from pride to paranoia. They're trying to own us. We're selling out. About time someone up there treated us like equals. I testified before the United Earth Assembly with my back still aching and my patience long gone. They don't own us, I told them. And we don't owe them obedience. This isn't about crowns or control. It's about choosing not to be small anymore. Veilira watched from the gallery. No crown, no armor. Just her. Later, alone, she asked me if I regretted it. Every day, I admitted. And not for a second. She laughed then, a soft, musical sound. Humans are strange. Yeah, I said. You'll get used to it. The ending, more than a crown, the wedding wasn't the spectacle everyone expected. No galactic parade. No forced pageantry. Just a shared sky above Kelry's prime, human and Cerity symbols intertwined, and vows spoken in two languages that struggled and succeeded to say the same thing. I didn't become a king. Veolyra didn't lose her throne. Instead, something new took shape. Joint councils, shared fleets, mutual defense pacts that required consent, not obligation. Human officers trained alongside Cerity tacticians. Cerity engineers helped rebuild human colonies lost to earlier conflicts the galaxy had ignored. When the Vracs returned, because they always do, they found something different waiting. Not an empire standing alone, but a coalition bound by choice. Years later, standing beside Veolyra as she addressed the Concord, I realized the galaxy had finally learned something about humans. We don't marry for power. We don't fight for glory. We don't kneel easily. But when we choose to stand with someone, we stand all the way. And that, more than any fleet or crown, terrified the stars. The galaxy did not change all at once. It never does. At first, the alliance between humanity and the Cerity Empire was treated like a fragile experiment, something scholars discussed cautiously and admirals prepared contingency plans for. Other powers watched from a distance, waiting for it to fracture under the weight of cultural mismatch, political tension, or the simple truth that humans were not supposed to matter this much. Veolyra and I felt that pressure every day. Being married was easy compared to being watched. Every decision we made was analyzed for hidden motives. Every joint operation was scrutinized for imbalance. If humans benefited, critics accused the Cerity of favoritism. If the Cerity gained ground, they accused humanity of selling loyalty for protection. The irony was that neither of us had wanted this attention. We had wanted honesty. And honesty, it turned out, was disruptive. The first real test came less than a year after the wedding. A fringe Concord member state, the Trelk Union, petitioned for protective oversight of a developing human colony on the galactic rim. They claimed humanity lacked the experience to govern a multi-species settlement safely. I sat in the Concord chamber listening to them discuss my people like a logistics problem. Veolyra sat beside me, spine straight, expression carefully neutral. When the motion passed its preliminary vote, she rose. "The Cerity Empire formally objects," she said. The chamber stilled. "Humanity is not under Cerity protection," she continued, "nor under Concord supervision. They are sovereign. Any action taken without their consent will be considered a hostile act." The Trelk delegates bristled. "You would threaten war over a minor administrative." Veolyra turned her head slightly toward me. I stood. "Let me be very clear," I said, my voice carrying the quiet edge humans have perfected in battlefields and boardrooms alike. "If you send ships, inspectors, or advisors to that colony without invitation, you won't be meeting farmers and diplomats." I paused. "You'll be meeting the same humans who rammed Vrax fleets with supply ships and called it a delaying tactic." Silence felt like a held breath. The motion was withdrawn. That was the moment the galaxy stopped seeing our marriage as symbolic. It was policy. Not everyone approved. Within the Cerity Empire, traditionalists whispered that Veolyra had weakened the throne, that she'd allowed emotion to override centuries of calculated rule. They were wrong. She hadn't softened the empire. She had reshaped it. For the first time in Sarathi history, non-Sarathi observers were permitted to attend High Council sessions. Not to vote, but to speak. Human representatives sat in those chambers, not as petitioners, but as witnesses. And witnesses change behavior. Corruption that had once been quietly tolerated vanished under scrutiny. Military doctrines evolved when human officers asked uncomfortable questions like, "What's the civilian survival rate?" and refused to accept vague answers. The Sarathi did not become human. They became better Sarathi. And humanity, standing beside them, grew into something new as well. The Vraks returned 3 years later. They always did. This time, they didn't bother with probing attacks or border raids. They came in force, logic arrays calculating that the human-Sarathi alliance was still statistically unstable. They were wrong. The battle for the Kelry's corridor lasted 11 hours. Human strike craft flew ahead of Sarathi capital ships, drawing fire and opening lanes. Sarathi shield walls closed around human carriers when the Vraks counterattacked. Orders passed seamlessly between species, accents overlapping, assumptions gone. At one point, a Vrak's command node attempted to broadcast a psychological warfare message, offering humanity survival in exchange for withdrawal. I was on the bridge of the Sarathi flagship when Valyra authorized the response. She didn't look at me when she said it. "Transmit human command frequency," she ordered. My voice went out across the battle space. "Hey," I said simply. "They're lying." The human fleet surged forward. When the corridor finally fell silent, Vrak's wreckage drifting like dead stars, the galaxy watched in something close to awe. Not because we had won, but because we had won together. Years passed. History books began referring to the era as the Binding Age, the moment when alliances stopped being transactional and started being chosen. I never became comfortable with titles. Consort felt too ornamental. Prince felt wrong. Valyra solved the problem in a very Sarathi way. She abolished the role entirely. "The throne stands on service," she declared. "Not bloodlines or ornamentation." Some nobles protested. Then she reminded them who had bled to keep the empire standing. They fell silent. As for us, we argued about mundane things. Trade routes, fleet budgets, whether human coffee was an act of aggression. We also watched stars rise together from palace balconies and refugee camps alike. Sometimes, late at night, she would trace the scars along my spine, souvenirs from a war neither of us had fully escaped. "You changed the course of my people," she once said quietly. I shook my head. "No." "You listened." She smiled at that. Decades later, when the Concord commissioned a monument to commemorate the end of the Vraks threat, they asked us what it should depict. A king and queen. A human soldier and an alien princess. A battlefield victory. We refused. Instead, the monument showed two figures standing side by side, unarmed, facing the stars. The inscription beneath it read, "They did not unite because they were forced to. They united because they chose to." That became humanity's reputation in the wider galaxy. Not conquerors, not subjects, but the species that demanded one condition before kneeling, bowing, or binding itself to anyone else.